have no longer being met in Father's love. You're beginning to find it met in your ministry, older brother. You're beginning to find it met in somehow relationships with others. You don't feel as warm. You don't feel as free in your relationship at home with your spouse, with your children. And then you find yourself in verse 14 at a time where it seems like the inheritance that God gave you is gone. Renewal's over. Renewal's over. Oh, when I hear that, guess what I know? Because it's not been over and over with me. With me, I continually live in a sense of the presence of the Father. It's not always a warm, fuzzy thing, no. But I'm constantly hearing the voice of the Father say, Jack, you're my son, in whom I'm well pleased. And it's bringing transformation to my marriage. It's bringing transformation in all of my relationships. It's bringing transformation even to many of your lives. Because I'm living in the center, crying out. Always there? Oh, we'll learn tonight. Not always there. But drive of my life, receiving love and giving it away. And then renewal is sustained in your life. But see, he came to the point to where he had consumed the blessings of the Father upon his own lust, and the inheritance was gone, empty. And a severe famine began to occur in that country, and he began to be in need. And he went and attached himself to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he was longing to fill his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. Here we find a need beginning to cover in his life. Remember what happens as soon as you drift off center of the Father's love. Your single greatest need is receiving love. Once you drift off center, now you have a need that's unmet. And an unmet need does what? Makes you sick. Every relationship in your life begins to become unhealthy. With God, with yourself and how you feel about yourself, with your spouse, with others. And so you start gradually moving into a place of defilement where no young Jewish boy ever would find himself. He would never find himself among a pig, eating pigs, entertaining pigs, feeding pigs upon a pig farm, complete defilement. In the place, in the thing he said, I'll never touch that. Now what's he find himself in? And all the ministers, 50% will end in divorce in North America, 40% will end in affairs, and I guarantee you, every one of them would say, I never planned on doing that. I thought everything was going to go fine. Everyone that's ended in a moral situation said, I thought it would be everybody else and not me. And now in renewal, it's rampant everywhere. Immorality, right in renewal. And every one of them would say, I never planned on it happening to me. But you find yourself to where it seems like your need is no longer being met. And then what do you find yourself surrounded by? Foreigners. Foreigners who are not concerned with meeting your need, they're concerned with getting their need met. Other people with unhealthy relationships, born again, spirit-filled, say all the right religious things. But when you get around one another, it just feels warm and fuzzy, and they just understand me more than my spouse does. Mm-hmm. And some of the ladies out here thinking, oh, I wished my husband knew the things that Jack knows. You just put a wall of division between you and your husband by comparing your spouse to me, and you've opened a door to a spirit of a Jezebel into your marriage relationship, a spirit of without habitation, without cohabitation, and you've just put a wall of division between you and your spouse with those thoughts. Of course, the men's thoughts are different. In the pig pen of defilement, with the place of dissatisfaction, the place where no one's meeting our needs, so we're constantly looking to others, and foreigners are right there ready to come into our life. And yet just a few years or a few months earlier, we were right in the midst of the center of Father's love, dwelling in his house, God moving awesomely in our life, God meeting our need, God providing for us, and then we don't know how it happened. We didn't discern our drift. And where do you find yourself? Remember? It all began valuing the Father for what he could do for him. What happened to the prodigal in these last 3 verses we read? He comes to a place to where now one needs meeting his need, but everybody's using him. He's now at a place to where everybody, the foreigners in his life, value him for what he can do for them, yet none of them are giving him anything. Do you see how sowing and reaping results? One of the things every pastor, every minister that comes to us for ministry, or should say 9 out of 10, don't want to use an absolute, one of the things we hear over and over again is, I have no one meeting my need. 70% of pastors, people in ministry, have no one to talk to, do not have a close friend, have no close relationship in their life. They don't have accountability, they don't have counselors in their life, and over they come up and I say, I don't have anyone in my life. I just find myself giving, and nobody putting into my life. And I immediately know who drifted. I know their value system. They have valued the Father for building a ministry, not for intimacy and love. And because these ministers have valued God for what he could do for them in anointing and gifting and building a ministry so they could be seen, be heard, drift started and they didn't know it. But they find themselves surrounded now by people who just suck them dry, take. They're dry. They find themselves in all types of fantasy relationships. They find themselves now in unpure bonding to others. They find themselves being drawn to others within their church staffs, others within their congregation in unhealthy ways. And no one's meeting them in need, and it is all the fruit that has occurred from valuing the Father for what he could do for you more than intimacy and love. You see what's happened? Do you see how easy it is to drift? And if we'd ever realized the consequences of our drift, it would be much easier for us to come back into the center of Father's love. And then the Son came to the place in verse 17. He came to his senses. And if you have a prodigal, this is what you want to pray. Father, bring them to their senses. How many of Father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I'm dying here with hunger? I thought there was enough love in other places. I thought I'd receive all the Father's love and take it and give it to the world, but you didn't stay secured in it. You didn't make it priority within your home life. But he said, now in Father's house, I'll come home. And I'll get up and I'll go to my Father and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired hand. First thing I want you to see here is the Son goes from give me to change me, change me, change me. We're going to pray that at the end of this time. Because 70% of us here, at least, have valued the Father more for what he could do for us than for intimacy and love. Change anything in my life that is not comfortable with love. That's the core. Because we learned Tuesday night. Until you abide in love, living your life to meet others' needs at your own expense, not in your ministry, in your family. Until you abide in love, drift continually occurs over and over and over. And every time you drift, you will misrepresent the Father's love to others. And there's dangerous times ahead. Distance, a lack of honor, neediness, brokenness. But what's it leave him with? Shame. I'm no longer worthy to be called a son. And once you no longer hear the voice of the Father say, oh, Dad, you're the Son in whom the Father loves and whom he well pleased. Once you stop feeling like a son, you start saying, make me a hired hand. You want to come home to Father's house, but you feel unclean from the counterfeit affections. And so let me come back to Father's house and work for you and I'll serve you, and I'll serve you, but it's not service motivated by love. It's service motivated by guilt and shame. And that will leave an angry edge to your ministry. That'll leave an angry edge at home with your family. Because ministry, we'll see tonight, is to be an overflow of the Father's love in our family. That's what turned the world upside down. Ministry that is rooted and grounded in love, not shame or fear of failure. And so we see him at the point, I'm no longer worthy to be called a son. Now, I like this phrase. I circled it in my Bible. Make me. Oh, I love that phrase. That takes the pressure off of me, because I'm the type guy, give me a formula, show me what to do, I'll do it, I'll make it happen. If you want to get something done, just get me involved. I will get something done. I'm a mover and a shaker. I'm a doer, 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 and that's just a bunch of do, 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 do. But this son realized, I can't get home on my own. I don't have it within my power to be made a son. I don't have it within my power to be made even a hired hand, but I want to come back to the Father's house and see what I put in there is make me a son. Because Jesus didn't die to make us into servants. He died that we might be placed in the Father's presence. That's the definition in Greek of adoption. That we might be adopted as sons, Romans 8:15, and break all condemnation and bondage and fear as we're placed in the Father's presence. And see, this son comes home. He has the hard attitude to come home, and we see what happens in verse 20. He got up and he came to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. You notice his father was searching for him. His father was looking for his return, and he felt compassion for him, and he ran, and he embraced him, and he kissed him. You know, when we fail, the worst is not when we need a finger pointed in our face giving us a lecture. When we fail, the worst, and usually every Sunday when we come into church, 8 or 9 out of 10 of us feel that way. We don't need to be told all the things we're doing wrong. When we fail the most is when we need outstretched arms ready to restore us into love, not a rod of discipline ready to judge us or punish us. We need comfort. We need healing. And why is this the only place in the Bible where we see God ran? Remember the circumstances upon the son's failure and the son's rebellion. He had violated the laws of Moses, and the laws of Moses said this son must die. And when this son left with all that money, you don't think he rubbed it in with all of his friends? You don't think on the way out of town he went to all his buddies in the neighborhood and he's like, look what I got. You know, I got this bag of gold. I got my father's inheritance. I'm going out. See you later. What do you think all these other sons now did to their father? I mean, they tormented their father. Because you know how it is, those of you that have had children. Your sons come and always borrow the authority of the other parents, you know, and they come up and say, well, Johnny's dad did this for him. Johnny's dad bought him a car. Johnny's dad lets his curfew be an hour later than mine. And so all these sons are now harassing the fathers, and that whole community is in an uproar because of all the problems that were caused from this one dad giving the inheritance to the son. And I guarantee you this father wasn't the only one looking for this son to come home. The other ones were waiting to get him too, because his wanted poster was on every pole in town. Because they're going to set their son straight by making sure this son gets the punishment he deserves if he ever comes back to this town. And see, the father saw him on the road far away, and he knew. He could see the outline of his son, but he saw the posture of shame. And he ran to this son because he knew if the older brother gets to him first, there'll never be a homecoming. If the other religious people in town get to him first, there'll never be a homecoming. And he'd been standing watching. Just like every one of us that have drifted off center into prodigal issues, into addictions, or into immorality or pornography, just like every one of us that have drifted off center, Father's watching. He's watching with his arms outstretched, and he's waiting just for you to make one turn towards home and realize, my value system was wrong. Father, I'm coming home now because I know I've consumed my inheritance, and so I have nothing, and there's nothing else I can take from you. I've already consumed it all. I just want the Father's embrace, because he knew coming home there was nothing else the Father could give him because his inheritance was gone and spent. And so his value system had changed now, not based upon what Father could do for him, but I just want my Father's presence. And the Father saw that in his posture, ran to him, threw his arms around him, embraced him, kissed him. Where did it say he asked the son to get his attitude right? Where does it say he asked the son to confess his sins? Where does it say, well, you need to wait till church on Sunday and come down and to the altar and get your heart right? Where does it say, well, been in a pig pen, son. First, let's get you to the house and get you a bath, okay? He violated the laws of Moses again by running and embracing his son, because his son was defiled from the pig pen, and it was going to take 7 days of ritualistic cleansing before he would ever could be restored into fellowship with anyone, much less the repentance required for the rebellion. And Father ran to him in all of his uncleanness, his sin, shame, threw his arms around him, embraced him, kissed him, no matter what sin you're walking in. No matter if you're in an adulterous relationship, if you're in a homosexual relationship, if you're a pornography addict, he's not waiting on you to come to the altar and do all the crying and pray all the right prayers. He's ready to run to you, and all you have to do is turn your face toward home. You don't have to be clean enough to receive the Father's embrace, because we learned the scriptures yesterday morning, John 5:22. The Father judges no one. And there was many companion verses to that. We learned the scriptures in Hebrews 11:16. He's not ashamed to be your God. And he wasn't ashamed to run to this son in the midst of all of the Pharisees, in the midst of everyone standing and watching, run to this son, throw his arms around him. And when he did that, he signaled to the town, keep your hands off my son. All you accusers in this town, all you other father of lies in here, all you Pharisees and traditionalists that live by the letter of the law, keep your hands off my son. And then the son begins to say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your eyes. He wouldn't even let him finish. And he said, quickly, to his servants, run and get the robe. And he came and put a robe of righteousness. He put on him the robes of sonship, the robes of wealth, because he had on a slave's robes. He was the son willing to be a slave, and the body of Christ is no different today. Sons by inheritance, sons by the work of Jesus Christ. Yet we feel more like servants than slaves because we don't know who we are in the Father, and we drift off center of the Father's love so easily. Quickly put the robe of righteousness on him. And in Christ, at the moment of salvation, you accept Jesus Christ as Lord of your life. He covers you with a robe of righteousness. We know in our thought life there's still some inward darkness. In Christ, we are new creations. Old things have passed away. All become new. But in our thought life, in the mind, will, and emotions, in the soul, there's still some of these ungodly beliefs, some of these thought patterns and strongholds of rejection or impurity that are there. But God never looks under there. He covers you with a robe of righteousness. He never looks under there. The good news. The bad news is, husbands, your wife looks under there. And she reminds you what needs to be changed now. Father loves you the way you are, not the way you should be. Your children know what's under there. And they close their heart to you. The people at work know what's under there. The people at church, the people in the neighborhood know what's under there. And then you begin to believe the father of lies. You begin to believe more of what others think and say than what the Father says. And when you believe what others say, you act like that and you treat them like that. And you live life as if you don't have a home. But when you believe what the Father says about you, and you realize this is the Father, not this, then we start believing that, we start acting like that. Jesus said, you're doing the deeds of your Father. John 8:38. And if you're not comfortable with love, you're listening to the wrong voices. Because if you're hearing the voice of the Father, I see you're unclean from the pig pen, but I'm running to you. I'm taking you in my arms and I'm embracing you. My study all around the walls is nothing but prodigals in the Father's arms. And I go in and I just sit down and I just look at the pictures on the walls of the prodigal. One of them 4 feet high. The Return of the Prodigal by Rembrandt, a print. Because so often I am he. So often I'm the one who values the Father for what he can do for me. And my soaking times and my prayer times are just sitting there, identifying with the prodigal. And I have so many homecomings. And homecomings are wonderful experiences. They're always emotional. But see, religion hates homecomings because they involve emotions. And see, and Father welcomes me home. And you know what else? He put the ring back on his finger. The son was coming home, and he says, I know if the Father has nothing to offer me, my inheritance is gone, it's spent, there's nothing to offer me anymore, I'll never have anything else of money-wise. And he comes home, and all he wants is, I just want the Father's love, I just want the Father's love. But what's Dad do? He puts the ring back on his finger and says, I'm going to give you your inheritance back. My child, I am always with you, and all that I have is yours. He restores him the full inheritance. The son comes, just make me as a hired hand. Just make me as one of the slaves in your house. Oh, but what's Father do? He puts shoes on his feet. Slaves weren't allowed to wear shoes. And he put the sandals on his feet, he said. You'll not be a hired hand in my house. Father's not looking for hired hands. He's looking for sons and daughters. Completely failed, yet utterly restored into the Father's love. Had no right to anything, but Father delights in giving you the things you have no right to. And it all depends on your value system. Now, how do you have a homecoming? How do you experience a homecoming? 3 simple points that we've seen in this relationship with the prodigal. The first one, the prodigal remembered what a loving father he had. He came to his right senses and he remembered his father's house. I shared how my own encounter with the Father's love in November of 1996, and it took about 4 months to win my 14-year-old daughter back to my heart. And for those 4 months, I wept and I cried, and I'd look into the eyes of my children, and I'd see the devastation I'd inflicted in their life over so many years. Being an authoritarian father, a father that valued obedience more than relationship. And I'd weep. I'd even crawl up in my 17-year-old son's lap. I'd come over there, and I'd sit in his lap. Please, son, forgive me. And I'd just cry, and I'd just weep, and he'd just sit there. Sometimes he'd give you this little laugh or smirk that I'm going to make you suffer more. And it wasn't long after that he turned 18 years old and he hadn't opened his heart to me. Because it had been 17 years. He'd given me a chance before. No chance now. I pleaded hands and knees, begged specifically for forgiveness. I confessed every sin I had ever inflicted against this son. He would not forgive me. He'd just stare at me. He stopped living in his room because he came out and sat in the living room just to gloat. As I humbled myself, trying, pleading with him for restoration. And on his 18th birthday, I told him to go clean his room. One of the boundaries in our house is you will have a clean room. He says, I don't have to clean my room anymore. I'm 18 now. I'm a man. And I heard that. That was the same thing I said to my father at 18 over my hair being too long. And my first thought is, why don't I treat him the way my father treated me? He deserves it. But Father restrained me. And he begot to be the most, man, when I was a hippie, I had some really terrible roommates. I mean, some of the people you had to live with, but nothing was as bad as my son. And this guy made our life so miserable, and I did everything and tried boundaries. He got worse, and finally, I mean, when he began to take it out on my wife, and one day my car was in the shop, and I wasn't there, or I was at home, and he didn't think I was home, and he came in the house and started it on my wife, and I stepped out from around the corner. I thought I was going to kill that kid. If not for the Father's love, he probably would have never been healed because I would have destroyed him, or he would have beat me to death, one of the two. But I said, that's it, son. I got on the phone, and his dream was to be a golf pro. I called a friend of mine 400 miles away where I grew up, that part owner of a golf course and a golf pro. I said, how would you like to have my son work for you, whom he knew, who's one of the greatest workers on golf courses, no good, worthless, nothing at home. He said, I'd love to have him work for me, but I can only pay him minimum wage. And I said, well, I'll get him to stay at my dad's house. And I called my dad, and Micah wants to move down there and be mentored by Lawson, by your friend, your golf friend, and mentored in golf. And would you mind he lived with me? I put up with you for all those teenage years. I'm not going to put up with him. There's no way he's living at my house. I know who he is. My mom and dad were divorced when I was a teenager, so I called Mom's house and my 80-year-old mother, and I said, Mom, how would you like to have Micah come down and live with you? I would love to have him live with me. And I told Micah, I got you a good job. He'll mentor you. He'll train you to be a PGA pro. You can go down there. You've got free room and board. Mom, your grandmother spoils you, gives you everything you want. You can go on down there. And he said, good riddance. I can't wait to get out of this house of hell. And at 19 and a half years old, my son drove the 400 miles down. He didn't call us on the phone for 5 months. We'd call down there. He didn't want to talk. We'd call to the golf course where he'd answer the phone. How you doing? Fine. He hadn't said a kind, gentle, tender word to us since we were 14 years old. 5 years of his heart completely closed to you, devalue, de-honor, but certainly when the money came time to be handed out, he'd take that. He wanted a roof over his head. He wanted the food, but he didn't want anything to do with the relationship. And I remember after 5 months he called. I pick up the phone and I hear the voice say, Dad? I hadn't heard that tone of voice in 5 years. Micah? Yeah, hi, Dad. How you doing? You want to know how I'm doing? You care? Well, I just thought I'd call home and what's going on with you, son? Well, things aren't too good. Well, why? Well, I don't have any money. You don't have any bills except for your car and your insurance. Well, I've gotten so many speeding tickets that my insurance is thousands of dollars, and I've got this high car payment, and I can barely make the bills meet there, and I don't have any food. You don't have, you've got your mother's house where grandma doesn't cook, and she only puts junk food in the house, and if I want to eat, I've got to be home by 5:30 and pick her up. And she carries all the little ladies in the neighborhood out to the old folks restaurant, and I'm sitting here. And you see, he would help my 80-year-old mother get in the station wagon, and then he'd make 3 other stops in the neighborhood and pick up all these 80, 85-year-old ladies in fluorescent orange dresses, and this red lipstick all over him, and he's this 19-year-old hunk, and cut and ripped and all the exercise and everything it takes to be a golf champion, and $70 golf shirts. I just wear my son's shirts, He comes home. He took mine for all these years. I take his now. And he gets them free in the golf pro shop, so they're mine. I take ownership of them now. And so here comes this gorgeous young man knocking on the door because he has to escort him out. But before he escorts him out, they're kissing all over him. He said, "Dad, they're ruining all my shirts with their lipstick,